Ice. Most people don't know much about it, except that they like it in their drinks on a hot summer day. It can be described as water at 0 Celsius, or, for any Americans that are listening to this, anything below 32 Fahrenheit. I came with a research group that was supposed to sample ice cores and observe the surrounding conditions. A group by the same name as the company and the ice shelf where my Scots Polar was pitched 45 degrees west of the sun. If they hadn't been paying me big bucks, there'd be no way in frozen hell that I'd be here. It wasn't about the science. It wasn't even about being right. I love the science, and I've always hated losing an argument. It's the fucking cold. It's so cold that even getting angry about it feels distant, as there's nothing more important than getting warm. Even on a record day with the sun overhead, boiling water turns into mist when it is tossed into the air. Land, the frozen tundra is hundreds of meters below. I am an ant on an ice cube. Perhaps even smaller. On this day, the Ross Research Foundation had sent me and 2 other employees 20 kilometers across the shelf to get some cores. They were in a hurry because they couldn't wait for the expedition crew to return. For what reason? I have no idea. It made sense for Chloe to be here. She was the glaciologist. London? Maybe. Out of everyone on this continent, he had the most Arctic experience. A whole lot of good that will do him, as Antarctica is a different beast. And I was a structural engineer, mainly responsible for raising and lowering equipment. A glorified camper, to be honest. I wouldn't be much help in an actual crisis, which made me wonder why the company was breaking its own policies by sending us out today. No dead weight was rule number 3. And yet, here we were, a couple of saddlebags around one horse. This is completely fucked. The cabin rattled into my ear. We shouldn't be here. Chloe shouted at me. 100 meters out, as she held up her hands. We should have waited until Dave and Simon got back. Chloe shook her head. I couldn't tell if that meant she couldn't hear me, or if she didn't know what the company was thinking either. I love you, I shouted at her. She only smiled, then nodded when the crawler hit boulders of ice in our path. The front tires lurched over a particularly rough patch, and the sun visors came crashing down, swinging its arm into my face. I winced and grabbed at my eye. The plastic had split the brittle skin on my brow, the warm blood instantly drying before it can blur my vision. It's so cold in here that there's little humidity. The entire place is one big sponge that is gasping for even a drop of water. I can taste the ice crystals in my throat when I try to swallow. They prickle the inside of my mouth and the back of my tongue, the part where I can make a grown man gag, causing me to cough as I try to cry out in pain. Instinctively, I start to take off my gloves, but London reaches over and smacks my hand away from each other. He points to the thermal gauge on the screen. It's cold in here. So cold that if I took off my gloves and managed to get them wet, unprotected in these temperatures, my fingers would start to turn bright red, as if they were on fire, as the cells in my skin would start to die. And in a few minutes, under the right conditions, the tissue in my fingers would collapse, and I wouldn't be able to use my hand anymore. Amputation would be the only course of action. Chloe pulls out the med bag out from beneath her. The company was in charge of every detail in our missions, even down to who sat where. London and I were expendable, that much was clear, for we sat on either side of Chloe as 2 human meat shields. She pulls open a bandage and breaks a heating pad behind it before pressing it against my head, squeezing the frozen crust shut, causing it to bleed momentarily as it reopened. She pinches the edges along the cut, and I can feel the yellow fat lining the inside of my skin bulge out as her fingers tuck me in like a stuck zipper. the freezing cold sealing my wound shut as if it had been welded. "We'll have to stitch it when we get back," Chloe mouthed. I nodded and waved a thanks, just as London poured on the brakes. The tires skipped across the surface until we finally came to a halt. The engine shut off, causing the recirculating heat pump to sputter to a dead silence. "We're here." "What?" I said, "This is the spot." "We're here?" London nodded and pointed to a round disc on the ground. It was the size of a car, in the shape of a manhole with an orange and green light blinking from a small antenna attached to the top. London started grabbing the equipment in the cabin as he motioned for me to open the door. I pulled the lever and pushed against the steel frame. It felt like a metal needle on an exposed nerve, its hypodermic fang seeping lead into my body. I climbed out onto one of the custom tires. The rubber on these things were taller than my knee. From the roof rack, I began unloading footlockers filled with telescopic bits. The wind had grown stale, but it could pick up at any moment, so I moved quickly in case a freak blizzard sent giant bolts of ice raining down from the sky. There was an expedition in 2002, where one of the researchers ran into an ice storm to retrieve a dataset for the Larsen B ice shelf before its collapse. The data would have been the last chance for us to understand the geological impacts of the area surrounding Cape Horn, where the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific meet before it disappeared. She was found several weeks after the storm had let up, less than 30 meters from her base, in a forest of icicles that stuck out from the earth as quills on a porcupine, some thicker than a telephone pole. The dataset folded across her chest, her legs still in the air as if running, with a spear of ice plunged between her shoulder blades and exiting her abdomen like a butterfly pinned in a book. Removing her would have cost a fortune, and leaving her served as a stark reminder of the dangers out here, but also as a symbol to the importance of our work. So they left her there, for better or for worse, with many lovingly referring to her as the Snow Angel whenever they passed. By the time I got around, London had already pulled the Dowler off the back of our crawler. The Dowler is the love child of Dr. Kelsey Grant, one of the lead engineers on the team. It stood about 15 feet tall when unfolded and was the only device that could dig into the pixie tubes. See, the problem with ice core samples had been that it would sometimes take years to drill deep enough, and if the drill were ever to stop, then the hole would either collapse or fill with ice in a matter of days. The Ross Research Foundation commissioned Dr. Grant years ago to solve this problem. She inserted braided pipes called pixie tubes down drilled holes and capped them on either side, so that when a new group needed samples, all they have to do is pop off the top of the old one, drop the bit down the empty shaft, and drill to the other side at the bottom in order to continue where the last group left off. Imagine a flexi straw suspended by ice down below. I got the first rounds. London exploded the canisters found at the ends of each leg, causing the steak spilled within the Dowler into the ice. He lifted the tap on the last leg and pulled the hard yellow ring. The CO2 exploded and punched an arm worth of steel down. He slapped the back of the Dowler. This thing isn't going anywhere. I hauled over the disconnected drill bits to him. Let's make it quick. The north face doesn't look steady. There's never anything quick about drilling, he shouted as the Dowler sits over the exposed metal cap in the ground. The data says we're stable. Chloe pulled her Canada Goose closer. Bet you wish we were back at the base. Any chance of us cracking through the tubes? Or worse, splitting the ice and lopping off a part of the shelf? I asked. It's bad luck to talk about the ice, mate. London positions the drill over it until the cap begins to disintegrate. We're through, he shouted as he turned to Chloe. We can start on your mark. Remember, no faster than 2 meters per minute. Anything more, and we could accidentally rupture the braided lines without knowing it and cause a pincer below our feet, she yells. A pincer is a type of crevasse, a moving one, and it is one of my worst nightmares. Imagine standing on solid ice, and then the ground suddenly disappears, falling 10, 20, hundreds of feet, hoping to be lucky enough to die on impact instead of being trapped between two vertical ice sheets that are shifting to fill the void. The walls drift on sheer weight alone. It reminds me of early scuba divers who traveled too deep and were crushed alive. The water pushing in from every side, and the air is squeezed out of their lungs before it all comes rushing back in through their mouths, engorging their bellies full of salt water until their bodies are equalized with the pressure. Wouldn't want that. London pulled his goggles over his eyes. Chloe's watch beeped as the towler screamed its head into the ice. I watched the thing kick back fine grains of ice powder as it broke through the upper membrane that had been trapped inside. Flecks of ice shavings landed everywhere, the kind that was thin enough to melt from what little body heat could be found out here. If I didn't know better, I would think that this was the ice's way of protecting itself, fighting against us in order to keep its secrets. See, getting wet out here is a different kind of danger unto itself. Even sweating spelled a certain death wish. I looked up at the sun. It may as well have been a light bulb in the refrigerator. All it did was cause me to squint as I stared into the endless rows of ice ridges in the distance. Nothing could live here. Things could pass by. They could cross. But this was truly the edge of the world. "We're past the bottom cap," London shouted, waking me from my daydream. I checked the line feeding through the top of the dollar. "We're still good." Watching it feed up and over, and then down below. Chloe looked up from her laptop and confirmed. "The ice is steady." London nodded briefly before grabbing the bars beneath the dollar. "Lowering stands by 5 feet." The legs collapsed around the hole, reminding me of a king crab if it could squat. "Pushing through the end cap." I could almost hear it pop as the drill pierced into the ice on the other side. The three of us looked at each other. I didn't know I had been holding my breath until Chloe broke the silence. "Here's to going where no one has been in over 1,000,000 years," she shouted. I couldn't help but smile. She held up 2 fingers at me. 2 meters. I nodded. "Ice, ice, baby," London recanted. I watched as the bits continued to disappear down the hole. "How far did they want us to go?" I asked. "Company says we need another 20 meters. 20? Chloe nodded at him. "Yeah, we'll be here for a while." "Any idea what it is they're looking for out here?" London asked, bits of snow already crusting the goggles on his face. "Same thing as always, I'm guessing." "Do they think it's unstable?" Chloe shrugs. "Maybe they found something in the ice cores from before." She must have saw the look on my face, because she laughed. "Come on, don't be that gullible. I'm sure it's nothing more than some atmospheric data that they need to feed into some machine." She hadn't finished her words when a sudden snap cracks through the air. I didn't have time to process what was happening before I see the bits plummeting over the dollar and down into the hole. "Shit!" I tightened the clamp around them. Sparks flew as the brakes bite into the steel. "London!" I pulled the handle on the feeder to try and slow it down. It's no use. Ice has coated the rods and it was slipping. I looked up to see one of the legs of the dollar collapse from the force of the drill falling. A gust of snow rose like smoke and traps London beneath the legs. I can see the horror in his face as he looks back at me. Almost see the fear in his eyes behind the reflective amber on his lenses. Before he disappears from view. Chloe rushes to the cruiser and starts to pull out a tent. It's standard company policy and a courtesy everyone in the South knows about. The few seconds of warmth here could save a life, even some limbs, as there was nothing else she or I could do except to wait for the debris to clear. "London? London?" I shouted again as I'm finally able to reel the bits to a halt. I rush forward, but Chloe grabs my arm, parts of the tent still in her hands. "The glacier might not be steady," she yells at me. "Here!" She tosses me a Kevlar-infused rope as we huddle around the remains of the dollar. "In case it opens up, so we don't get separated." I hear a groan as the steel moves. My feet back up instantly, and I almost plow Chloe to the ground. She's grabbing onto my arm, her feet skittering beneath her as we try to get away. I can hear something splintering below. It is a worse sound than any bone that I've ever broken, almost like someone is chewing on teeth until they crack right into my ear. I try to mouth the words "fuck" as the two of us scramble away. The dollar collapses another leg. I think I hear someone screaming. I don't know if it's me, but when I look up, I can see a split in the ice. It ran from where the dollar had stood to between my legs. I looked behind me and saw it stretched for over 10 meters before disappearing beneath the snow. I was too terrified to move a muscle. Chloe's hand on my elbow felt the same way. I don't know how long we sat there, petrified. But when the clouds of snow had settled, we could see parts of the dollar still above the surface. The cracks leading away from it weren't that deep, considering how thick the ice was. "I think it looks worse than it actually is," Chloe whispered. I could still hear the hum of the dollar as the electronics on board hadn't shut off. "London?" she called out. "London?" It seemed as if I suddenly remembered. I slowly got to my feet and edged toward the dollar. A part of me wanted Chloe to stop me, but she let me go. As I edged closer, I could see a bright red jacket poking out from under the snow. "I think I see him," I shouted back at her. "Is he okay?" I get on my hands and knees until I am flat on my stomach and crawl toward him, my hand grabbing a sleeve as I start to pull. He didn't look like to be breathing. I knew that the ice was thick, but we needed to move quickly. But we also thought it was thick before we started drilling, so I moved with purpose and slowly slid him forward. When it looked as if he were finally coming loose, I felt something snatch. I tugged on his jacket again, and he wouldn't budge. It was then that I realized that he was twisted around. His knee must have broken in the accident, creating an abnormal wedge in the snow. I turned him over with great effort, and was then finally able to pull him free, his body still limp by the time I got him over to Chloe. She immediately started tending to him, sticking hot pads into his jacket, under his armpits and between his groin. I brushed as much snow off him as I could, and with Chloe's help, I got him into the tent. Once inside, we stripped him completely naked, drying any part that we could find. He was wet down to his back and all over his trousers. I could smell the urine on him as we worked quickly to stabilize his condition, putting on a set of new clothes to warm him. I don't know how long we worked for, but eventually, color began returning to his face. The manual resuscitator was removed from his mouth as he started breathing again on his own. The two of us fell backwards on our asses as we watched him breathe for a while. Shit. Shit is right, I told her. We have to start hitting back. I nodded. I've got to get the equipment first. For a second, she looked at me as if I were joking. But she knew as well as I did that this was the only dollar on our side of the camp. The other two had went with an earlier expedition that wouldn't return for 2 more months, which means without it, there was nothing we could do out here. A waste of everyone's time. I left the tent and observed the area around the pixie tube. The dollar laid on its side like a fallen monument, its yellow frame frosting over as the wind began to pick up speed. I inched closer to the dollar until I was able to grab the handle. I looked down the hole and saw the pits mainly intact. The ice beneath us seemed to have stabilized. Experience told me that it must have somehow shifted below, causing the pit to go into a free fall as it was drilling. The force of the pits being fed overhead was at a speed too great for the legs, and it collapsed under the weight. It was a miracle that the ground didn't open up from under us. Even more of a miracle if the drill weren't stuck right now, pinched between two adjoining sheets of ice. I wondered, if it was stuck and I moved it, would it cause a ripple effect over the shelf? No time to think. The temperatures were already dropping, and I could hear the wind speed flapping against the tent behind me. We had to move and get out of here fast, off the ice shelf and back to the interim. I reversed the lever and prayed when it began churning. The pits below crinkled as it began to move back up. I was glad that it wasn't stuck. I started collapsing and loading the spit-out pieces back into the footlockers one by one. Everything was going better than expected as the pits started coming up. I must have gotten through 200 meters before I saw the steam rising from the pixie tube. What the fuck? I whirled around and saw London hobbling towards me. You should be resting. And that's what I said. Chloe chimed in from behind him. But he said it's safer and faster if the three of us did it together. London nodded. It's procedure. And plus, I'm feeling better. I can't feel better with a broken leg. I looked down at the aluminum cast strapped to his thigh. The painkillers are working now. I can't promise that in another hour. He grabbed one of the bits, staring at the smoke coming up from the hole. And I'd like to be back at camp before then. What do you reckon it is? I asked. The three of us looked on, not a word exchanged between us as the bits kept coming out, watching the steam grow thicker with each tug until the end was exposed, clearing the hole and clipping itself into the dollar like a guillotine. We stood there in silence as our brains tried to make sense of what we were seeing. It's not mine, London said. Chloe crept toward it, the steam still rising upwards. The drill head that had been covered in metal teeth like a worm being pulled inside out was now covered in blood. I watched it drip off the steel and onto the ice. It was red, but thicker than any human blood I have ever seen. And it was still wet. I don't know how long I had been holding my breath, but my lungs couldn't bear the pain anymore. I inhaled and nearly choked on a lung. Do you hear that? London broke away. He leaned closer toward the hole. Shh. He motioned at me. Listen. I tried to hold back my cough, straining my ears towards the hole, hearing the whistling sound. A scraping sound, carving and gorging from down below. What is that? Sounds like something spinning, I told her. Yeah. London nodded. Yeah, like a stuck bit down there that's still spinning. Except we got the whole thing out. He glanced at the drill head resting beneath the dollar, moving underneath the device until his head was nearly in the manhole. The drill pointed at his back like an arrow. Hello? The sound of his voice traveled down the tube. After a few minutes, I could hear it echo back at him. Damn, that thing's deep. He looked up at us, almost satisfied as he got off his hands and knees. Alright, let's get this thing back to camp and get some samples. Maybe we hit a new species or something. I don't know. What about that noise? Chloe asked. London scratched at his chin. When I was up in the Arctic, we had nothing but a lot of free time. And firearms. Sometimes we would shoot at the ice. If we shot it at just the right angle, the bullet would spin like a top. It almost sounds like that. So I'm guessing maybe one of the canisters fell down there and went off, likely still spinning from the force. It should be nothing. Now, come on. He grabbed the footlocker. Help me get this thing back to the crawler. He hadn't finished his little speech before we all heard it. It was soft at first, but then it happened again. Hello? Came a mimicry from deep below the ice. It traveled up the tube and froze us in our steps. The sound was unlike any human noise I have ever heard. It was thicker and harsh, like two flaps coming from the throat. It was almost like a parrot, like something pretending to speak. I could feel my lower lip trembling as I looked behind us. Hello, 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 hello. It came, mimicking the speed of the drill as it repeated the last thing it had heard. I didn't even have enough time to move before we started hearing scraping and rattling coming from below the pipe. Something was climbing up. London fell as he tried to run towards the crawler. Chloe had already yanked on the door handle and was rummaging through the cabin for the keys when I caught up with her. Chloe! I shouted at her and grabbing her with both hands. Chloe! We have to get out of here! She screamed at me. We have to go! Now! I shook her. We have to seal the tube. She looked at me for a second. I could see the fear in her eyes before she nodded. Seal the tube! Seal the tube! She repeated. I reached into the overhead compartment and pulled out the disc that had been attached above the seats. It was solid and nearly 100 kilos. It was all I could do to push it out of the cruiser and watch it fall into the ice with a thick thud. What are you doing? London shouted at me. He had managed to climb up the bumper, riding himself. We have to go. I shook my head. We have to seal it. London looked at the tube. It shook. Fuck. He pointed at me to track the thing closer. I'll help you lift it when you're near, he shouted as he limped toward the opening. I ran over to the cap, turned it so the explosive welders on the back weren't being scraped on the ground as I dragged it towards the pixie tube. I could feel the sweat beading from my armpits, but there wasn't any time to worry about that now. I looked up when London started shouting at me to hurry. His mouth was open as a hand rested on the lip of the tube as he looked into the hole. It was now shaking so badly that it vibrated his entire body. The towler shifted, and suddenly, the drill bit came loose. It plunged downward into the hole, taking London with it. I stared in horror as he disappeared, nearly slipping on the drops of blood that had been on the ground from earlier. I abandoned the ceiling cap knowing that I couldn't do it alone and ran as fast as I could back to the crawler. Chloe was standing stiffly next to the vehicle when I pushed her inside. Her body was in shock as I started it up, the heat pump blasting us with frigid air as the crawler groaned as it came alive. I turned us around, the tires biting into the snow, driving as fast as I could toward camp. The entire ride back, I couldn't even face Chloe. Neither of us had spoken a word. Not even when we saw our few tents came into view. They stood in a makeshift order around one another, their sides empty, indicating that the rest of our team weren't back yet. A part of me wanted to drive right past it and head back to McMurdo, the station where there were others. But I could feel the exhaustion creeping onto my shoulders and knew that we needed rest and supplies if we had any chance of making it back alone. When I pulled to a stop and got Chloe into her tent, she finally broke the silence. I wished she hadn't. I saw something climb out. She grabbed my arm. What if it was London and we left him? I shook my head, knowing that the drill had fallen on him, plunged him deep down that pipe. Knew that if something did come out, whatever it was, wasn't human. even if it did bleed red. I tore off my boots and saw the blood on them. It still hasn't dried. Get some rest, I told her. We're going to need it. The thing about the South Pole is that no one's ever truly warm. I can feel the coldness seep into my bones. My body is always a shiver away from being too cold to move another muscle. It makes walking difficult, breathing too. The air is thin and ragged on my lungs. Even thinking becomes a harrowing task. And I'll put this down in recording. I don't care if anyone in the future will see it as an admission of guilt, but it was probably why I wasn't thinking clearly after we arrived back at camp. I never should have took the equipment, cutting Chloe off from the rest of the world. I never should have left her alone. But by this point, my self-preservation mode had been active since we first left for the mission, and it was all I could manage to come up with before I crawled into my own sleeping bag and passed out. It never felt so dark. And that's something I never thought I'd say after spending nearly every day in constant sunlight. This was the beginning of summer. The midnight sun wouldn't set until long after October. I constantly had to remind myself all those days ago. Those days when I wished that the sun would go down for a second. A wink. Those days that turned contemptuous, where I wished the sun would sizzle out so that I may get some decent sleep. Those days when I didn't give a damn about anyone, if only for a wink. Now I'm glad it's high up in the sky at all times. Glad that I can see if anything is coming. God, I hope so much that it's help that is coming for us. The 6 hours after our ordeal at the Ross ice shelf was a strange one. I woke up thirsty and damp. Damp is danger. Any moisture is dangerous, but my body was too tired to care. What was a finger or even a limp if it meant that I could get back to base, get on a helicopter, on a boat, and get home? I'm a long ways away from Ontario. That much was certain. I dried myself, changed, and not once did I look down at my body, afraid of what I might see. Protocol dictated that I contact points of authority, report to them what happened and what we were facing, even if it meant what I had to say would cost me my future in the field. I think that was why I took all of our communication equipment and hid it in my tent. That way, when I slept, Chloe couldn't sound the alarm before I had time to think, before we could talk things over. She was only 2 years out of her understudy. Her career had only begun. And I wasn't ready to give this up yet. I did this even though I knew I was directly disobeying rule number 2. Keep an open line of communication. Without it, people die out here. I don't remember how many times I've seen it. A simple yes or no that could have saved someone's life, while the information we were withholding was undoubtedly more important. I keep telling myself this was the right thing to do, that we needed to be clear-headed before we made any decisions. Those thoughts went out the window the moment I opened my tent flap. Outside in the snow, right at the foot of where I had been sleeping, were footprints. Hundreds, if not thousands of them. It looked as if an entire procession had passed through. How one person could do this all alone was beyond me. But I could see it from her point of view. It was as if I had taken away her sovereignty, treated her like a child, and took away her ability to make decisions for herself when I took away her ability to connect with anyone else other than me. A dangerous feeling for someone, anyone, let alone a woman stranded in the middle of nowhere with a man she hardly knew. "Chloe?" I called from outside her tent. "Chloe?" I called again. after what felt like longer than it did. "What?" I was glad she was talking to me. "We have to start getting packed. Leave for McMurdo." She unzipped the teeth in her tent. "I'm ready to go. If you're not done in 5, I'm leaving you." I could see the bags forming under her eyes, and the corners around her cornea were bloodshot as well. "Shit, did you even get any sleep?" She pushed past me, her pack heavy on her back. For a moment, I decided to argue, point out the elephant, but I didn't want to shift the momentum in our movements. So, I bit my tongue, and quick enough, I got in my tent and stuffed a few things I thought I would need. The trip through the Lewis and the ice belt was about 3 days, give or take. We would need food, shelter, and I grabbed my drinking can. The soft plastic was easy enough to grip in the cold and to store when it was empty. Mine was almost empty. I had a half propane canister, which meant that I could melt another 1.5 liters at most. I groped around my back for more water, and I found none. By now, I knew she could hear me outside, scrummaging, thinking, knowing where the water had been stored. Most of it had been in the crawler. The rest of our provisions were stowed in London's tent, a tent where Chloe's footprints had been all over. Before I thought she was only looking for the equipment, but now I knew better. "I'm afraid," she said as I exited my tent, her arms crossed. "I'm not stupid." "Chloe?" "Shut up." She threw her back into the crawler. I could see it wiggling, straining against the straps as it was scorched with liquid on the inside. "I was trying." She rounded on me. "And you think I don't know what you were trying to do?" She took a step toward me. It felt as if I had been pushed. "You didn't think that we read the same handbooks? Faced the same consequences? What did you think that this was a—" "I'm sorry." I held out my hands. "Look, I'm sorry. I was scared, and I was tired. I didn't know what to do. All I knew when we got back was that I needed to rest." I didn't mean to change the subject. "Did you get any sleep?" "At least now you can tell them back at the station our radio wasn't working. And if they don't believe that, you can tell them how you stopped me from contacting headquarters." "Fine. Fine is right." I paused. "Should we contact them now?" She looked at me. "If we contact them before the point of no return, they might want us to turn back. And I'm not staying here for another second." "Agreed." I hesitated. "What do we tell them about London?" "We tell them how he died. The drill didn't clip in properly and there was an accident." For a second, I saw the look of the old Chloe, the kind and caring Chloe in her eyes. But it disappeared quickly enough. "What about the blood?" "Without proper evidence, they might hold us and blame it on spring madness. Extreme sun exposure affecting our brains." She looked at me. "We'll never stand a chance." She chewed on her lower lip. "I say we hand it off to the lab. Let them take a look at it. If they report anything abnormal, it'll be someone else's problem. They'll stand a better chance at convincing them than us." We looked at each other silently and agreed between ourselves. "Let's go." I nodded and climbed into the crawler. My hands paused for a second as I held the key. "What?" I turned to her. "What if it doesn't start up?" "Don't say that." I turned the key and prayed. The engine began clicking, sputtering and gurgling as the ignition coils zapped the petrol in the cylinder, trying to light. The starter began to sound like a sickening laugh. After several tries, It finally gurgled, letting a plume of black smoke out of the rear as she groaned to life. The cabin shook slightly as I put her into gear. There was nothing but an endless horizon of ice and snow in every direction as we pulled out into the open. I used to joke that God had forgotten his paintbrush here. Chloe laughed. It was the first sign of the tension between us cutting since I woke up. It was a mixture of giddiness and relief, infectious for me to smile through my teeth. "We're getting out of here," I said aloud. She laughed again. "Damn, you don't know how scared I was when I found all of the equipment gone." As she flipped through the dials, the sense of routine beginning to put us both at ease. "You don't know how scared I was trying to leave that tent," I told her. "Fuck, this place does weird things to you, don't it?" "Yeah." I adjusted our navigation. "It'll take us about 3 days to get to base." "Oh, what about those footprints?" I chided. She laughed. I almost peed a little when I saw them. I could feel the smile disappearing from my face, the tightening around my heart. I could tell Chloe noticed, because suddenly, she looked scared too. "I thought they were..." "No." We had been driving for nearly 9 hours. Several times we had to put the arm down on the crawler. The arm was a flat panel with an inflatable tube filled with sensors that extended about 8 meters in front of the bumper to test the areas ahead for crevasses. Falling through one in the crawler would surely mean death. Getting stuck the same. Several hours ago, I somehow managed to convince Chloe that I wouldn't murder her in her sleep, and she was finally dozing off. Her head pressed against the sidebar, and her legs propped against her chest. I could see her breath fogging the glass window, even though the heat pump from the engine bay pouring through the front dash was keeping the cabin fairly warm. Warmer than usual, I'd say. This had been our first expedition together, and although I didn't know much about her, outside of work, I couldn't help but feel drawn to her. She was attractive by all means, but it was more than that. An attractive woman can hold my attention for so long. With the advent of social media, I've stared at attractive women unabashedly while on the comforts of my own toilet. She began to stir, and I quickly looked away. "This god-awful light," she murmured, shielding her face with a hand as she was greeted by the glistening white scenery in front of us. "It's like my sister when we go to the beach." "It's beautiful," I said. "Haunting is more like it." She reached into a bag, pulling out a container of water. I watched her drink. I could almost feel the soft liquid touching my throat. After a while, I noticed her eyes were peering at me from above the plastic ridge. "Do you want some?" She handed me the water. My free hand gripped the soft edges and squeezed it down my gullet. After I had finished, God, water is so underrated. She laughed. "Would you like a beer?" My eyes lit up. "You don't have some, do you?" She reached into the back and then pulled out her fist with the middle finger extended, while laughing. "Oh yeah, real mature," I groaned. Man, a beer would have been great. She couldn't stop laughing. "You should have seen the look on your face. Go back to sleep." Chloe capped the water and stored it back into her bag, leaning slightly against it. "Do you think we should contact base by now? Let them know our course?" It was rule number 4. Maintain a travel itinerary with command. "I don't know. What if we need help? It's easier to search for us if they had a general location. I don't plan on falling through the ice. We didn't plan for a lot of things. She nudged the navigation. Plus, we're past the point of no return. As she reached for the console above her head. I had clipped it back some time ago. The signal cracked over the speakers. "AFAN, this is Crawler 2215. Do you copy?" We waited in silence. "I think you're supposed to say the call sign." I did. I thought it was KC4W. I remember it being AFAN. I shrugged my shoulders. "Call out McMurdo station and see if anyone replies." She choked the receiver. "McMurdo station? This is Crawler 2215. Do you copy? McMurdo station, this is Crawler 2215. Do you copy?" Chloe holstered the comm. "Nothing," I muttered. "This is KC4W, McMurdo. 10-4 over." "Fuck!" Chloe grabbed the mic excitedly. "McMurdo, this is Crawler 2215. We're traveling through the Ross Ice Shelf. Coordinates -84, -123. Following the Holby line back to base. Over." Breaker. This is Expedition 7. Chloe, is that you? Over." She turned to look at me. "I think it's Simon?" "Chloe, what's going on? You're about 130 kilometers away from us. Shouldn't you be back at camp?" "Simon? We're heading back to McMurdo. There's been an accident. London's dead." There was a long pause. "This is McMurdo. Crawler 2215. Please repeat. Are you in distress? Over." "Yes, we're heading back to the station." She pauses. "Over." Another long pause. "Chloe, this is Simon. We've departed from P99 and nearing US core site 385. We should rendezvous at -78, -170. Over." I looked at Chloe and saw her beaming. This was great news. We were traveling. We were meeting up with other members of our team. We were heading back to base together. "Sounds great, Simon. From our coordinates, it looks like we're about 18 or so hours out. Over." "This is McMurdo. We will prepare for your joint arrival. Medical team will be on standby. Over." I stretched my neck, wiggled my toes, and found new grip on the steering. We were going to make it. Over the next few hours, we would sporadically hear updates from Simon's crew or directly through McMurdo. Chloe got into gear and began tidying up the crawler and was back to inputting data through her laptop. And I readily surveyed the path before me, making sure I was plotting all the correct points coming onto my screen. And we were making good time. Everything was settling back to normal. If my lips weren't wind-cracked, I would have considered whistling. Several times, we passed by blankets, top layers of snow that covered a crevasse's opening. But our equipment held up despite my lack of experience, and we made it safely enough. Eventually, Simon's crawler came into view, and I could even see their tents from this distance. They looked like yellow pyres signaling us. "Should we get them on the radio?" Chloe asked. I shook my head. "Let's surprise them." She laughed. "God, it's going to be good to get back with the others." "The more the merrier," I laughed. When we had pulled close enough, I sounded the horn, not even bothering to take the key out of the ignition as I hopped out, the engine rumbling behind me. "Simon?" Chloe was having difficulty getting out. The crawler was quite tall, and she was dragging her equipment along, the look of a scientist back on her face as she was worried about preserving our findings. Even the blood sample she had scraped off my boots didn't seem to bother her. It sure bothered me. "Simon?" Chloe called. "Amy? Hey, can someone help me with this?" I popped around her side and grabbed the two thick satchels from her. "Thanks." "No problem," I mentioned. Hey guys, I called out. Chloe looked at me. Turn it off. What? The crawler. Oh, right. I reached over and pulled the keys out. They fell into the ice. Shit. I looked down the hole where they had dropped. It could be anywhere, nearly anywhere but straight down. I dug a glove into the snow, rummaging around. Shh. Chloe hushed. Do you hear that? I stopped moving and strained my ears. Silence. The sound of nothing was deafening. Neither of us moved a muscle. I was too afraid to even move my eyes to search the grounds in case it made too much noise. Suddenly, I could hear myself blink, and when I swallowed, the small bones in my ears clicked. I began to hear my heartbeat in my chest, the way it strangled itself each time. Chloe took a step forward, and I heard the snow crunch beneath her feet. Guys? I called out. Simon? Amy? She paused. Dave? Where is everyone? I attempted. Hey. I took a step toward a nearby tent, my hands moving in for the zipper all the same as any other day. A part of me pretending that everything was fine made it easier to unzip. It was empty inside. Angela? I called out. Look! Chloe pointed to the corner of the tent. Tracks! I followed them around the tent. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. They were in the shape of feet. Someone. I tried to laugh. Someone's forgot their boots. I tried to laugh again, but it came out hoarse and shaken. They're barefoot. Chloe screamed. I turned around and suddenly I felt sick. The hours before finally catching up with me. My knees were wobbly, but I forced them in her direction until she came into view. She was buckled before a tent. The flap laid on its side. Crusted red by the cold was blood. We have to get out of here, she said. What about the others? I reached my hand to the next tent, shaking it, afraid to open it, afraid of what I would find. There's only 3. I swallowed. In there. Where are the others? She shook her head. I don't know, but we have to get out of here. She grabbed my arm and started pulling on it. They can't be dead. Not all of them. Come on. From a tent directly to our left, we heard a groan. I looked over, the blood in my veins running cold. One of the sides had collapsed, and it was slightly opening. Snow had already begun piling inside. Chloe took a step back and fell. I saw her hands reaching for the ground around her, for something to grasp. All she found was the ice between her gloves. I wanted desperately to pick her up, pull her from under her arms, but my legs wouldn't let me. The tent shook again, and then something fell out. It looked up at us. A glacier of blood caked onto the side of his face. Shit! I tried to find my bearings. Dave, are you okay? He shook his head, his voice groggy. I couldn't make out what he was saying as I pulled him to his feet. His wound had frozen shut. What happened? He asked. I don't know, man. We just got here and... Where are the others? His head suddenly dancing on his neck as he swiveled back and forth. Something came at us. It ran me right over. Oh God. His eyes sat on the tent where we had found the other bodies. Oh God, No! He reached out his hand. Tiffany? Amy? Where's Simon? Chloe asked. I think she's still breathing. Dave knelt into the tent. Patrice! Dave motioned for me. Help me with her. I think she's still alive. I wish I could have said I rushed over quickly, but I didn't. When I got to his side and peered into the tent, I could see clearly for the first time. Their faces were torn. Tiffany's jaw was hanging open, and her eyes were rolled back, the thin mucus on them long frozen in place. But it was their stomachs. They had been ripped open and gutted like fish intestine on the ground. That made me throw up. I heard it splatter on the ground as it left my mouth. Thick like stew, it began layering on the snow as it hardened. Jesus Christ, Dave said. Get a hold of yourself. I wiped my mouth. What happened? By now, Chloe had helped Dave pull Patrice out of the tent. There was a gash in her stomach, but it wasn't serious. At least, not compared to the thing forming on the side of her head. It bubbled, likely filled with blood. A hematoma, some part of me remembered. Let's get her into the crawler, Chloe said. Then, she turned to look at me. We have to call McMurdo. I nodded. Yeah, I'll get on that. I rushed to the crawler and got my hands on the radio. McMurdo, A-fan. Shit, I don't know. Shit. KCWA 432. I don't. McMurdo, we need help. This is Crawler 2215. We're in need of assistance, over. After a second's hesitation. This is McMurdo. Please state your emergency, over. We have 3 dead. I let it die. 2 dead and 2 injured. One of them in need of immediate medical. Another missing, over. We can send an airdrop to your location. Please confirm. -78, -170. Over. Yes, we have joined with Simon's team, over. Stand by 2215. Over. Chloe ripped the transmitter out of my hand. McMurdo, we're not waiting for the arrival unit. Tell it to meet us on our course. We're heading back to McMurdo. Now. -2215. It'll be against protocol. I don't give a shit about protocol. She slammed the receiver down and turned the dial until it clicked off. What are you doing? Dave asked. He was still several meters away. What's going on? Standing over Patrice. Chloe looked at me, then back. Dave, listen. There's something. I don't know. There's something. Fuck. There's something in the ice. I could see Dave shaking his head, his eyes closing, his demeanor in full disbelief, as his mouth hung half open when it hit him. Took him right off his feet. It moved so fast and blended into the snow perfectly that it was difficult to see. Even more difficult to make sense with my eyes when it started stomping the ground where Patrice laid. For the snow came up like smoke as I see parts of her stamped out in the ice. That's when I ran. I ran as fast as I could. The ground slipping before me as the world turned upside down and I hit my head hard against the ground. If it weren't for Chloe, I would have never made it into the crawler. My head was still spinning when we took off. I could hear Chloe's panicked breathing as she kept looking behind us. I came in and out a few times. My vision distorted. It was like looking at snapshots, a strobe light in a dark room. When I was finally able to gather enough sense to fill a sentence, I looked over at Chloe, who had a death grip on the wheel, her exposed fingers beginning to blacken at the tip as she drove. They were covered in snow, and so were the keys. Chloe? She jumped in her seat. Fuck, you're okay? I shook my head. I feel like shit. She looked back again. Did we get away? I asked bleakly. I think so. I mean, I don't know, but I think so. What was that thing? I don't know. She looked at me and then leaned in close enough for me to hear. Did it look to you as if it came back for Patrice? To finish her off? Like it didn't even want Dave. He was just in the way that thing tossed him. But it ripped into her stomach, pulled out her guts and crushed them. Did it look like that to you? Did it? And I didn't want to take solace in this, but I found some comfort as we kept driving into the endless white snow. That if it was only killing women, that maybe I was safe. The snowstorm came roaring from the distance. It took nearly half an hour to reach us. It spread from one kissed horizon to the next. There was no way to outrun it. Still we tried. The crawler chugged petrol and huffed on the fumes as it made its drunken stumble across the ice, the front grille gaping as it swallowed boulders of snow, lifting the front wheels into the air until it was nothing but blue in the windshield. Then the rear tires went airborne, white, as we seesawed our way through unforgiving terrain. I can't see 3 meters out, Chloe shouted at me. I looked through the windshield and could see the arm extended outward, but the tire with the sensors were completely missing from view. It's only going to get worse, I told her. Keep driving. By now, we were completely covered in the first wisps. It was jarring to see the world surrounded by the snow in every direction. It twisted and turned, fast as lightning, looking like static through every window. And even though we were windstruck, I could hear it behind me, the growing beast wiping over the entire board. Clean. And we were but a mark in its way. Do you hear that? I nodded. It was a sound I had only read about in the handbooks. At the time, it didn't make any sense, but our instructor assured us that if we were ever unlucky enough to hear it, we would instantly understand what he meant. And if we heard it, well, let's just say, don't even worry about praying, because you won't be able to hear the thoughts in your own head. It's like someone is gurgling rotten teeth. Chloe shook her head, and I watched her lips form on her face, but no sound came out. None that I could hear as we were engulfed. The hail came in the size of quarters at first, but soon they began growing. I glanced down at the monitor. The readings were inconclusive. Come on, you piece of shit. Work. I hit the side of it with my glove. Still nothing. I could feel my hand throbbing underneath the material. It was cold in here. I glanced at the temperature. It was dropping every second. In the arm of the storm, temperatures could get below 60 degrees. In 1983, near Vostok Station, it got even colder than that. At negative 50 degrees, a passing wind can take your nose and ears. At 100, the body starts to freeze in place. I looked at the readings and saw the arrow hit for the red. We have to get warm. I struggled to remember. Soon, it was all I could think of as I reached for the hot pads, crushing them between my gloves until they popped. I watched the foil expand until it was bloated around the middle. I offered it to Chloe, but she refused to take her eyes off the road in front of us. They were glued into the windshield, staring out into wide abyss, hypnotizing her into place. I think I tried to say something. Maybe at how pointless it was to be that vigilant during this time. At these speeds, if there were anything in our way, we would hit it. Any markers, and we would still plow right past them. These thoughts haunted me as I looked forward and saw the arm start to dip downward, its head still missing from the white swallow before us, as we began to fall in slow motion. Suddenly, my stomach felt as if a knife had plunged its cold steel into my abdomen, the tip spooning out flecks of my belly button as it scraped my spine, reopening the mouth I first ate from my mother. As we dropped, the head lung of the crawler crashed into a part of the ice as the wall speared upward in every direction. The yellow eyes of the crawler blinked as darkness came in bursts around us, before it all just became black. When I woke up, it wasn't due to the cold. At this point, I had already welcomed it like a friend. It was the sound of the steel crumpling that shook me from going gently. I lazily glanced over and saw Chloe's neck slumped into her chest. An orange beacon was blinking on the dash, and a splinter of light reflected off the ice as the other headlamp lay dead in front of us. "Chloe," I murmured. "Chloe?" I shook her slightly, but she wouldn't stir, though I could see the faint trills of life coming from her nostrils and knew that she was breathing. So I took the chance to observe our surroundings. We had fallen through a crevasse. This much was clear. Walls of ice in every direction, and a darkness so deep below us that I couldn't even call it black, only an absence. The crawler looked to be wedged, and the sky above us was nothing but an angry howl of ice and fury. The steel groaned again. For the first time, I could see it with my eyes. The ice sheets moving. It was both beautiful and terrifying. A mixture of feelings I'd never thought possible in this situation. For a second, my mind reasoned that it wouldn't be so bad if I were to die like this. At least it would be quick and painless. Those thoughts left me when I see a rock of ice, also wedged between the sheets ahead. It was barely visible by the low light. Splinter, fine white lines etched into its near spherical shape as it cracked. I could hear it from here. The thing seemed to be looking up at me, begging, as the walls crushed it flat, its screams crackling into the abyss as it was smothered by two giant siblings on either side. The frame of the crawler buckled again. "Chloe!" She stirred this time. "We have to get out of here." She shook her head. "It's hopeless." Chloe pointed an exposed hand at the dash. "All we can do is wait." I looked at the orange beacon. "They're never going to find us. They can't get through the storm. And what are we going to do once we climb out? We'd die in 3 minutes without the crawler up there." Another groan came from the steel as the ice shifted. "We're going to be crushed to death down here if we don't do anything." Before Chloe could protest, another shift caused the pillar to collapse. And the steel folded like paper. "Shit." She scrambled to the passenger side, her boots pressing against my thigh as she managed to get out of the way. "Grab the ice picks and the rope." She hurriedly rolled down the window until it became stuck. I reached in the back to grab our equipment while she kicked away a portion of the glass. "Help me out," she asked without permission as I felt her weight on my side. I pushed until her legs disappeared overhead. "Chloe?" All I see is a hand reaching down from above. "Hand me an axe and a rope." I slowly handed her both items, watching them disappear from view as their footprints clatter above me. "Chloe?" I wait for a few seconds before I see the rope reappear. "Come on, what are you waiting for?" I grabbed the rope and secured it to my waist. Before I start to climb out, I see the beacon on the dash blinking. I plucked it from the stand and stashed it between my jacket. Big mistake, as my body shuddered from the cold. "Come on," she calls again. I yanked on the rope and somehow managed to hoist myself upward. My muscles shook unsteadily as I clambered onto the roof of the crawler. I stick my leg under a loading rail attached to the top and wrap my knee around it, grasping a lungful of air as I laid flat in near exhaustion. I had barely closed my eyes when I start to hear the sound of steel again. Except this time, it was that of an ice screw which Chloe was turning into the wall face. "These will hold us," she told me. "We should climb to the top, but not all the way through." "Why not?" I demanded. "The storm's mostly blown over." I looked at my watch. It was cracked and had stopped working. We must have been down here for hours. Being exposed could kill us. The way the ice structure is at currently, it's warmer down here than up there. I wasn't about to argue with her, but every fiber of my being told me to get out of here. I had never been claustrophobic, but seeing the walls face to face on either side now, it was something that I was starting to develop. "I can't breathe." "Calm down," she told me. "Try to, slowly through your nose." "I can't breathe." I grabbed at my coat. I hear the buttons pop as I search for the zipper. "Calm down," she says again. I could see the wall starting to close. The steel beneath me groaned as it crumpled. The uneven ice, spiked on either side, slowly began to close as their tips tickled each other like a rolled-up centipede. Chloe had been trying to keep me still, but now both of us were frozen in place, watching, waiting for the ice sheets to stop moving. When it settled again, I whispered, "I can't breathe." "Shut up." I tapped at my chest with my hand to indicate my condition. And that was when Chloe screamed. The crawler had been slowly crushing below us, and it finally gave way when the ice shifted. It dropped from below our feet, and I went with it. If it weren't for the rope that was attached to Chloe, I felt her midsection buckle as it took my weight. It almost felt as if I would snap her in half. But I didn't care as I clawed vigorously at the wall, the tips of my fingers peeling back the nails inside of my glove as I tried to find a hold. I could hear Chloe yelling for me to stop from above, but my mind was in a panic. I pushed my feet against the wall, and it wasn't until my back hit the other side that I began to be truly afraid. The sheets had moved so much that they weren't but a few feet apart by now. The crevasse was collapsing, closing in on either side. "Pincer!" Snow began falling as the ice tried swallowing us whole. I could see Chloe wiggling her way to the top, the cut rope dangling beneath her like a tail as she grew smaller. "Wait!" I croaked. "Wait!" I scrambled upwards after her, pushing my body against either side as it kept getting closer and closer. I could hear the crawler crying below me as the light bobbed my shadow. My feet were raw, and my hands felt like bloody stumps attached to the ends of my wrists. But I was finally nearing the top. There was hardly any room, and with each passing second, it got tighter. I wasn't but a few feet from escape when I finally felt stuck. The room between me had become less than a foot. It was merely a crack at this point. I wiggled, trying to free myself, but my legs wouldn't dislodge. I could see Chloe's face staring down at me. She was screaming, but I couldn't hear her. The storm was still blowing wildly, and she was reaching her hand down at me. I hear another crack as the sheets shifted, and my vision began to blur. It was right before I blacked out that I felt something tugging around my arms. It felt as if they would be yanked right out of their sockets. Suddenly, something gave. The pressure around my legs were gone, and I was pulled out into the storm. It was only then when I felt the tears start freezing on my cheek that I realized that the storm had already passed, and the raging blast of snow was from the helicopter rolling nearby. I could see someone helping Chloe on board, and a stretcher had been brought out for me as two others strapped me down. I clutched the beacon in my hands dearly as I slowly drifted to sleep. You're awake? Where am I? At the Ross research base. Where's Chloe? She's recovering. What's going on? The woman turned to look at me. I recognized her, though I've never been formally introduced. I'm Dr. Kelsey Grant. Her lab coat was stiff as she turned to the figure in the door. He was tall and weather-worn, though the brace on his knee made it so he couldn't stand upright fully. The red Canadian jacket still on his shoulders. And he looked angry. London? Why did you leave him? Dr. Grant asked. You went against protocol, against one of the company rules. Oh my God, London! I could feel the tears welling in my eyes. You're alive? How? I climbed out of the tube after I had fallen through. Now, don't look surprised. That's my take. Because imagine my horror when I crawled out and saw you two taking off in the crawler, leaving me stranded, left for dead to suffer in the cold by myself. London, we thought you were dead. That it took you. The drill? The thing didn't fall 5 feet. It was collapsed, you fucking idiot. Do you know how cold I was? I could see his face stutter. How miserable? He held up an accusatory finger. If I hadn't figured out a way to send a signal through the pixie tube antennas, I would have died. He turned to Dr. Grant. This is negligence at its finest. An utter betrayal on the ice. What's the head office going to do about this? London, we didn't know. I looked at him desperately. We thought... You thought... There was something down there. He rounded on me. What the hell are you talking about? Have you two gone crazy? London, I begged. I'm going to make sure neither of you ever work here again. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. He gets in my face. They'll never trust you near a block of ice for the rest of your lives. You won't even get an ice cube for your drink without thinking the word lawsuit. Before I could say anything else, someone else came to the door. I didn't recognize him, but he addressed Dr. Grant all the same. I think you have to come see this. She looked at him, and he nodded. This caused Dr. Grant to get out of the chair and follow the man. London watched her walk away, turning to me before he followed her out. We're not through. You hear me? When they had left me alone in the room, the smell of antiseptic in the air and the machines buzzing and beeping around me, I realized that I couldn't stand another minute of being alone. So I followed them out, hobbling as the bandages to my torso limited my movement. Tracking my way down the long hall, passing by the sleeping quarters, until I saw where many others have gathered near the large double windows carved into the concrete. I tried peering through their shoulders, but it was difficult to discern what was happening out there. It wasn't until I got closer, standing nearly next to London, that I noticed what everyone was looking at. Outside, on a hill of snow and ice, just far away enough that it was difficult to make out their faces, stood a line of shadows in various states of dress. 5 figures on the ridge, standing there, staring in our direction. I glanced at the temperature outside. It read -68 degrees. No one could withstand those temperatures unprotected. How long have they been standing out there? I hear Dr. Grant ask. I don't know. Someone noticed it a few minutes ago, but they could have been there for hours. Lock this place down. No one's to come in or out. And Dr. Grant turned to look at me. Tell me everything. Dihydrogen monoxide is a versatile, frightening thing, commonly known as H2O, and most commonly known as water or ice, is also a gas. In its liquid form, it has the ability to squeeze things until they collapse by the sheer weight on its shoulders alone. In its gaseous state, it can reach temperatures capable of flash steaming a grown man alive. And as ice, it wraps all things of heat, pulling the warmth right out of a person's bones until they can no longer move. That's the thing about the Antarctic. No matter how many layers I've put on, or warm drinks and blankets up to my ears, I am always cold. If I ever needed a reminder of how harsh these conditions can get, all I need to do is look at the landing rooms. They are the chutes which connect us to the outside. On either side, there are two large steel doors, each with perfectly machined locking rods that had been balanced by the state-of-the-art equipment, insulated and then lined with concrete over a foot thick, all before it is encased in metal, and then stress-tested in the best labs the world has to offer. And yet, ice still creeps on its edges when the weather turns bitter. First, the ice blasts the outside and seeps through the pores of the concrete until it makes the steel on the other side so cold that it feels like it is burning. By now, a gloss will have developed in one of the corners like a flagpole left out in the snow. It's so shiny that it's nearly transparent, but if someone were to accidentally brush up against it with their bare skin, it would latch on like the back of a fly's tongue, ripping the follicles right off an arm, taking the top layer with it, leaving behind only the soft exposed pink underside that throbs bright red with frost. It's usually the new guy's job to clear these rooms when the ice melts and the frame bulges enough for the snow to creep through until it piles onto the floor, before it becomes a walking hazard. I was a junior structural engineer and hadn't had to do it in nearly 4 seasons. But at the Ross Research Foundation on Station 9, the company had recently decided that I couldn't be trusted with much else. So, Dr. Kelsey Grant, who is in charge of the daily operations, had stuck me on the ice duty at London's request. London and I haven't spoken again since I first woke up, because all hands had been on deck ever since Dr. Grant gave me a strict debriefing. I told her most of what I knew, handed over the sample of blood that Chloe had collected from my boots, and apologized about 1,000,000 times. I don't know why any of it matters. Once I get out of here, I'm never coming back. Fuck the job, and to hell with the money. I had been clearing chute 2 for about an hour now, and my hands were numb when I heard a familiar shuffling in the doorway. "Chloe." "Hey," she said. Half of her figure was covered by the doorway. I could see people behind her hurriedly passing by. "I just came from the lab, and I thought I'd come see you before I went back to my room." She stepped into the chute, revealing her other hand. It was wrapped up in bandages at the wrist. They had to amputate. I could still see the fresh blood weeping underneath. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." "At least we're still alive," she replied. She stepped into the chute and closed the door behind her, making sure it was shut. "We have to get out of here." I threw the shovel on the floor. "You're telling me. First chance I get, I'm gone." Chloe got so close to my face, I could almost kiss her. "You don't understand. Something is extremely wrong." I held my breath. "Didn't you see Dr. Grant looking at the sample?" I shrugged. "What of it?" I picked up my shovel. "Hopefully she'll find something that'll acquit us. I'd still like to get my last check." She shook her head. "Didn't you see her?" "Yeah, of course I saw her." I started getting annoyed. "Didn't you notice?" "What?" I gripped the shovel tightly in my hand. I wish she wouldn't say it. that I could just ignore this feeling that's been stuck in the back of my mind ever since I noticed Dr. Grant's reactions to us, to the 5 figures out on the ridge, to the way her face peered into the microscope and before I was dismissed. She's seen this before. Chloe, I'm just You know I started in petroleum engineering, and when my mom died, it was a real rough time for me. I had nobody else, not a single person left in my family, so when they had a program to be as far away from the rest of the world as possible, I took it. I love the science. But this? Look around us. This is bullshit. I'm going to do mine. And when they cart me back off to civilization, I'm going to the nearest beach, dig my fucking toes into the sand and be a beach bum, working at the docks when I need money, fishing when I'm hungry, and sleeping in a tent on the ocean front on some tropical island for the rest of my life. And you should do the same. Keep your head low and your mouth shut. Chloe slapped me with her good hand. I could feel the cold sting on my cheek. You're going to die if you don't check back into reality. You and I both saw the same things. And you know as well as I do, it's either those things out there that's going to get us, or they will. Why do you think no one's ever said anything? I rubbed the cold out of my mouth. Anything about what? What the hell are you talking about? Think about it. Think for a second. Something this big? Hushed up? Chloe, why do you think this is the only continent in the world where all the other warring countries suddenly decided to broker peace? A look of determination appeared on her face. 55 nations. China, Russia, the Americas, Europe. Why do you think they all came together and signed the Antarctica Treaty when they've never been able to agree on anything else? Why? It's because they found something out here. Something that made all of their bickering and politics seem so trivial that none of it mattered anymore. I could feel my lower lip trembling. Stop. You read the reports. You've seen the company's mission statement. You always knew something was wrong. I was starting to get angry. We all did, okay? All of us. Me, you, London included. And still we came anyway. Don't try to pin this on me. Don't try and make me responsible for whatever the hell it is that's going on here. I'm not, she pleaded. I just need your help to get out of here. That was when the lights went out. For a brief second, it was only us in the cold, before the orange utility lights began flashing into the dark room. Chloe? The door leading into the station started shaking. I pulled her away from it. A deafening bang on the steel broke our silence. I almost screamed, but the coldness in my throat caught it before I could cry out in alert whatever it was behind the door that someone was in here, that we were in here. Another rattle caused the door to shake. Snow fell off the wrist-thick bolts, which secured the hinges to the concrete frame. I took a step back and could hear the crunching of snow beneath my feet. The two of us stood there, neither of us moving another muscle, waiting for the banging to continue. Except, it didn't. What happened next was difficult to see. How does one see the cold? So, I'll explain it to the best of my ability. The air fell around me. Suddenly the door to my back, which led to the outside, felt warmer than the door in front of me, which led into the station. The orange flicker of light beat irregular to the thumping in my chest, as if it or they engineered the speed to try and calm me. All it did was make every part of my body shake, because deep down I knew something was very wrong here. The bit of moisture left in my eyes began to harden. But still, I kept my eyes glued at the door. I saw the ice crawl forward off the door into the corners of the wall as it swallowed all the heat in its path. I couldn't move. I was already so cold. And still, the coldness kept coming for me. I would have died there if it weren't for Chloe. She pulled open the door behind us and pushed me out into the frozen clearing. I didn't walk 10 steps before I stumbled. I watched Chloe as she shut the door and started running toward me. My arm was numb, but I knew she was pulling on it. My mind wasn't working, but my feet found themselves kicking up the snow beneath my boots as the two of us ran. And we were in nothing more than underlayers. I knew that we wouldn't survive long out here, but I still followed as Chloe led us around the complex. The wind was already blowing. Sheets of white in every direction. I could hardly see her in front of me. Several times I yelled at her to wait, but her figure became more dim the further away she got. I was shivering at this point. Each breath felt like a hiccup. My body shuddered and my teeth clacked in my head like a typewriter sitting in the middle of my brain. In that dense sleet, I ran into something. I fell backwards and landed in the snow. I could taste the blood in my mouth. They were like pennies by the time I spit them out. And I looked up to my horror. A figure clad in snow and ice, dancing above my head. Her face was frozen, and her arms were crossed. Sheets of ice on her back almost made it look like wings. The snow angel. My hands blindly groped around, searching for a direction. The direction she was pointed, only steps away from her compound. I followed her gaze and walked blindly into the snow until the gray concrete slabs came into view. I pressed my hands against it and edged toward the doorway. My trembling hands pushed against the steel door and I landed inside one of the chutes. It wasn't until I looked up that I read the number 4 painted on the wall. The lights had come back on. The generator must have kicked in. A part of me wanted to stay here, lay against the wall and just die, peacefully go into the cold. I didn't want to be afraid anymore. Not in my last moments. But then, I hear a scream. One that I recognized. Against every instinct, I hobbled to my feet and opened the door. Bodies. There were bodies everywhere. Wind was blowing in through the windows. I could see ragged pieces of flesh frozen on the jagged edges. I couldn't tell if they were from things forcing their way in or people forcing their way out. The scream again. I limped toward it, into a walk, until I was nearly at a run when I rounded the corner. All of that speed left me when I saw it for the first time. Clear as day, with my own 2 eyes. It stood so tall that its shoulders were scraping the tops of the hallway. The ice stuck out of its back and arms. It was grabbing hold of a man I didn't recognize. The beast stuck a long chiseled spike into the man's chest, pressing it slowly through the ribcage. I could see the man's eyes widen as he tried to scream, his hands helplessly trying to grip at the ice entering into his body, each handful slipping as it penetrated through him, painfully slow. London screamed again. There was a fire axe in his hands, and he was swinging it blindly. I didn't know what to do, so I started yelling at it too, hoping to distract it. It worked. The thing turned toward me, and I saw the piercing blue eyes in its skull, the way the boulders on his shoulders flexed and turned like flesh as it looked down at me. I froze in terror as it stared, as its features started to melt away, growing smaller, becoming more like skin as it looked back at me with my own face. From the corner of my eye, I saw London drive the axe deep between the creature's side. It howled, spitting out shards of ice that embedded itself into the walls, shattering on impact. I shielded my face and started to run. "Keep going!" I hear London shouting from behind me. I didn't look back, not until I got to one of the doors that had thick steel walls with a handle and a crank that had rods on its hinges thicker than my wrist. Not until I let London through and shut it with a thud behind him. The two of us sat there wheezing as we tried to catch our breaths. "Where are we?" I asked. "Not sure. Some part of the complex that's underground, I reckon." London broke a glow stick in his hand. Then he broke another and threw it to me. "Come on, we have to find a way out of here." I nodded and followed him. The lights had completely gone dark this time. The generator must have failed. Only the eerie green light protruding from our hands guided the way. I don't know how long we walked for, or how many empty rooms we broke through, each time preparing for a fight, before London asked me, "Do you hear that?" Voices. He nodded. "I think the others are nearby." He began running. "Hey, we're over here!" He was running so fast that I was having trouble catching up. "London!" I yelled. "London!" Until he almost disappeared from view. "Hello?" And it only happened a few times. Didn't even last several seconds. But as I sit here with the others in the storage room, I can't shake it out of my mind. Not even as sleep twitches my eye and I watch him propped up against the corner. The way London's head twisted a bit when I called to him earlier. When it was just the two of us. When he responded back to me. "Hello, hello, hello." The average body temperature for an adult human being is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. For everyone else in the world, that's 36 degrees Celsius. Hypothermia can develop in a difference of a mere 3.6 degrees change in body temperature. In the first stage, the body begins to shake uncontrollably, followed by reduced blood circulation. And if body temperature continues to plummet, most people start to slur their words. It's difficult to think clear thoughts when the brain isn't getting enough oxygen. Difficult to hear those thoughts when the body decides to warm itself by pretending to chew. Click-clack, click-clack. This starts to stomach up, as it builds if there is nothing to digest. And soon, it makes its way towards the throat, burning it, if the body doesn't outright vomit as it slowly starts to curl into the fetal position, the muscle memory of the time when it was most warm. What they don't mention in the handbooks is how the eyeballs start to stick in the skull as everything starts to move in slow motion as each red hemoglobin begins to freeze inside of the veins, compressing the air they're holding, gasping as they run their cold frames through every part of the body. And time seems to stop. People in the field joke about how it's one of the better ways to go. Better than burning or drowning. What they fail to mention is how fast those usually are. Freezing to death is slow and painful. It hurts so much that the body becomes stupid and think that it is burning. In the next second, it starts clawing off all of its layers. Except, they aren't clothes, but the bright red skin that's beating from the inside trying to escape. I can't think of a more horrifying way to die. Not when the cold is this close. Even in the storage area, with everyone huddled together that their odors start to penetrate my hair, crawling into my ear and sticking to the corner of my eyes. I'm freezing. I pull the red Canadian jacket closer to my body as stiff fogs of despair leave my nostrils in thick ghastly lines. I can see everyone else breathing heavy as well. Dim though is the light, I can see their breaths as they sleep. As sleep twitches at my face, causing my lips to almost smile, I can feel the deprivation begin to coerce my mind into manic fleeting thoughts that don't seem to make any sense. For instance, why wasn't London breathing? And Why hasn't he gone to sleep? Perhaps he's already dead. I can see him right now, staring at me, pretending to be resting. My brain is cold, but hallucinations aren't one of the symptoms. At least, I don't think they are. Several hours ago, the few of us who survived began to deliberate on our course of action. One of the women, Rosie, who worked in the biology department, told us what she knew, having studied a blood sample I retrieved on the Dr. Kelsey grant. It was all we could hope for. The note said that they were like a virus. Or no, not really. If anything, they think we're the virus, and like all good immunities, it takes out the enemy's way of replenishing its numbers first. Imagine that we're a virus. We land on some godforsaken planet. But that planet is alive, living, and us, the virus, can only increase our numbers through incubation, mostly singular. We're not a very good virus, are we? One of the others, Paul I think, said. No, but we're large, smart, and capable of destroying planets if given enough time. So, it starts to kill the women, so we can't reproduce. At least. She paused. That's all I thought it was at first. What the hell is it then? The fucking boogeyman? I don't know. I just remember Dr. Grant keep repeating rule number 1 while we were in the lab, muttering it to herself. Take nothing with you. Take nothing back. It was the first time I spoke since we got into the storage room. I always thought it was like preservation or something, for future generations. But then she started asking me if I knew what the mission statement was. Why we were out here, digging up cores, looking for the timeline until the end. I always thought it was the end, as in flooding when the shelves melted or something. But I don't think so anymore. It's something that's been haunting humanity since before it can remember. Something old, London said. Something cold. We turned to look at him. Imagine something that's part of the natural cycle, to keep populations in check, a balance on the earth, every order in its place. Every country and culture, those as ancient as recorded history, each with its own name for this other entity in the shadows, which only comes at night, that makes the children shiver when it arrives in their villages, taking out everything in its path and then melting away, leaving nothing behind except for the damp ground to bury the bodies. What the hell are you talking about? Paul said. I'm pretty sure it's Paul now, unless it's John. London shrugged. It's just a story I heard. He rubbed his hands together. So, what is our plan of escape? I'm tired of this ice hole. It feels like I've been stuck here for an eternity. There's a heli near the south entrance. It's been locked down to keep from blowing away in the storms, someone said. Who here can fly? Paul asked. I raised my hand slowly. I did some offshore training before coming here. It was one of the company requirements for my position. I can get us up, but I'll need a second pilot. I've got some experience, Alex said. I can be your second. Nicole, a biologist I knew from previous missions. That's great and all, but where are the keys? They should be in the control room, I told him. At least, that is what the handbook said. That's on the other side, Paul complained. The chopper's going to need some prep before it can take off. So we split into 2 groups then? London suggested. Team A will go prepare the helicopter for takeoff, and Team B will retrieve the keys. I'll be Team A. I looked him directly in the eyes as I said it. "I'll be Team B then," London said without missing a beat. "So, it'll be me, Rosie and Nicole." He looked at me. "Then you, John, Alex and..." "No, it'll be me, Rosie, Nicole and Alex. You can take John. He knows how to prep the helicopter, and Pascal knows where the equipment in the loading dock is." I took a breath. "And once we get to you guys, we'll fly our asses straight to the nearest Antarctic liner before hitting for shore." I couldn't read him at all. "Fine," London said. "But first, let's get some sleep." I've been laying perfectly still for hours, my back propped against a wall of concrete so thick it would make a nuclear factory blush. But my eyes were open, watching until the others had mostly begun to rouse. We split what provisions we had gathered. A candy bar, some peanuts, and a handful of sunflower seeds each. And without many words passing between us, we started heading for the doorway. Paul had his hand on the crank. London nodded to him and said, "Go on, John. At your ready, mate." Honestly, when it swung open, I didn't know what to expect. A horde of those things coming rushing at us, or a pile of dead bodies left at our doorstep to serve as a warning. I was the first person to look beyond our threshold. There was nothing in sight. If I didn't know any better, and looking at all the pallets laying around, the lights fully working, then I would have said it was any other mundane Monday morning. Except it wasn't. We were a bunch of adults, learned and experienced explorers in our own right, huddling in a storage container. And, as quietly as we came, our two groups parted ways. No sooner had London's group left our line of sight did I start to breathe normally again. I was going to find those keys and get the fuck out of here, and then dig my damn feet into the nearest beach I could find. We had been making good way without so much as seeing anything abnormal, though several times we heard something nearby, but patience and silence kept us safe. Several times I almost yelled out in pain as Rosie was hot on my heels, nearly breathing me in, pressing herself against me as it would somehow make her safer. I couldn't care less if she made it out alive. As far as I'm concerned, she knew all about this, or something similar, perhaps even before the expedition began, more than she was actually letting on. In fact, I don't give a damn if no one makes it out of here. Not really. Not if I would be the only one that made it. Not one other person. Except Chloe. I almost shouted her name, but I caught most of it between the space in my teeth. She looked scared. Her eyes were closed, and her back was pressed deftly beneath the backing of a sickly green steel table. She hadn't seen me, nor did the thing she was hiding from. This one was smaller than the other one I saw London kill. Maim. Hurt. I'm not sure. It was only about 2 foot tall. I don't know what made me do it. The anger? Hating being scared all of the time? I gripped the rebar that some of us found in the storage unit, the ones we bent at one end until it almost looked like a candy cane, and charged at it. I thought catching it by surprise would give me an advantage. I was wrong. It dropped to all fours and crawled on its belly. I could hear the ice scraping the ground as it started clawing at my face. My first swing missed. My next swing didn't. I connected with the side of its head. It wriggled underneath me as I forced the bar toward its face. The urge to drive the steel through this thing's skull was great. But when I let up, just for a second to position myself at the right angle, it screamed. It started off low, almost a howl, but it grew faster and high-pitched in my ear like whistle. It was all I could manage as I drove the rebar down its throat, until it stopped making any noises at all. "I got it," I panted. "It's okay." I looked around to see their stunned faces. I wiped some blood off my cheek that's been coming out of my ear. "I got it." I could see Chloe's mouth moving, but I couldn't quite make out the words. "What?" "I said, you fucking idiot. That's what it wanted us to do." "What?" It was at that moment that I hear a rumble from down the T-bone-shaped hall. I couldn't tell which side it was coming from. Left? Right? Somewhere else entirely? "Shit, we gotta go," Alex said. "What about the keys?" Rosie asked. "Fuck the keys," Nicole answered. "I'm getting the hell out of here." She grabbed Alex by the arm and the two ran off in the opposite direction. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I saw either one of them. "Come on," I said. "We have to get to the control room." "Keys? What are they talking about?" Chloe followed closely behind us. "Helicopter keys," I said without looking. "We're getting out of here, even if it doesn't want us to leave." By now, the rumbling was loud. I could feel the air growing colder in my lungs. It was getting difficult to breathe. I felt like swallowing needles with every inhale, and then pulling them out with each exhale. It didn't matter how much noise we made now. That thing was close. I could hear its footsteps growing. "Run!" I yelled. "Run!" The three of us took off, running through the halls, nearly breaking a rib rounding a corner as I wedged through each corner, wondering when I would encounter the noise we were trying to escape. But somehow, we made it to the control room. I threw open the door and rushed to where the keys hung. My hands were jittery as I flipped and fumbled fob after fob, searching for the right one. I could hear it in the background. Rosie moaning for me to hurry. "It's coming," she repeated over and over. "Found it," I said when I finally found the crescent gray handle. That was when Rosie started floating off the ground in excitement. Except, it was that thing lifting her into the air. I could see its icy blue fingers puppeting her body from behind, Rosie's mouth still open, her joy turning into horror as she realized what was happening. I could see right into her mouth, the ice crystals metastasizing in her stomach, climbing its way up to her throat before ultimately pressing a cold spike through the roof of her mouth and out the front of her eye. I grabbed Chloe's hands and we ran as far away as we could. It followed behind us, a broken firearms handle deeply embedded into its side, smacking the floor as it chased us, dripping blood everywhere. Blood that never froze. We turned corner after corner until we finally reached an exit. Chloe cranks the handle close behind us. I run forward and open the second door to the chute. A burst of cold air greeting us, a welcome smell from the putrid lingering of the station behind. Together, we ran toward the landing pad. I could hear the others shouting at us. I could see Pascal cheering. He slapped me hard on the back as we rushed into the helicopter. Thank God. I didn't think y'all would make it here. Where are the others? There's no time, I yelled at him. I fumbled with the key. I need a second. I motioned for Pascal to sit. Have you ever flown before? He shook his head. I started to show him the controls. Oh, what's going on? Paul asked. Get into the helicopter, John, Pascal ordered. Where's London? He asked. I'm right here. I don't know why those words sent chills down my spine. For a brief moment, I had forgotten all about London. Let's go! I shouted at Paul again. John nodded and started to climb into the helicopter. But then, it took him. snatched them right out of the air. I flipped on the switch and felt the rotors above me shudder as it came alive. Then, I yanked on the yoke and brought the bird airborne. We weren't a meter off the ground before I suddenly felt weight on the landing gear. I looked over my shoulder and out the window. I see the column hanging on the slick rails. And, with a free limp, it was choking Chloe to death, covering her mouth with ice. I could see her eyes screaming as the red lines splintered from her cornea. I let go of the controls and jumped out of my seat and reached for her outstretched hand. The thing spread more of its cold, sharp claws into the cabin. I could see London struggling. "Get away! No! Let me leave!" The helicopter suddenly jerks to its side, the blades threatening to belly flop from the weight. London slips, and he hits the cold floor hard. It happened so fast that he didn't have time to grab onto anything. He falls out of the helicopter. I feel the thing let go, pieces of ice breaking off, falls down far below. Pascal struggles to right the helicopter, but he eventually pulls us further into the sky. I take one look down as we're flying away. A storm is coming in, but I can still make out the image of London being dragged away. He's screaming, struggling, as he leaves a trail of blood behind. Blood that still looks wet. Chloe turns to me and shouts over the sound of the blades. "Thanks, I owe you one." All I can do is shake my head and laugh. In a few seconds, it starts to catch on. Pascal laughs too. Soon, the three of us are laughing as hard as we can. I rig the tank so that we can make it all the way to shore. Pascal pointed to the aluminum tanks under the seats. "We can get as far as Africa without having to stop." "We're getting out of here," I told him. "What?" Chloe mouthed. "I love you," I told her. All she did was nod, as the chopper bobbed in the air. When we finally landed, it was on one of the surrounding islands lining the rim of Australia. The island was densely populated, and technology had sparsely reached its shores. We used this to our advantage and began blending in with the locals as we kept a low profile, carving out a life for ourselves. Chloe and I even got married. Pascal Ever the Bachelor chased one girl after the other in the fishing villages nearby. And, oh yeah, I even got my wish. To dip my feet in some motherfucking sand. And I had nearly all but forgotten about the horrible things hiding below the ice at the bottom of the world. "God, it's hot here," Chloe complained one night. "What? You've never been to a tropical island before?" I joked. "It's almost midnight," she whined, "and it's still 20 degrees out." I shrugged my shoulders. "What can we do?" "We could leave." There was a dangerous glint in her eye. "You know we can't do that," I told her. "We would be risking our family's lives." I tried to reason. "We don't know who will come for us, or what. The government, the CIA, maybe even the Ross Research Foundation, or whatever it is they really are. Don't tell me what to do." I grumbled. "Fine, but I'm not talking about this again tonight. I have to get up early tomorrow." I extinguished the lamp near our bedside. "Plus, I'm tired, and I don't want to stay up and spend it arguing." I yawned. or else I'll be dead tired. And she says back to me, in the dark, "You're already dead to me," she huffed. "Can't kill something twice." "Yeah, sure, if that's how you want to see it. Go ahead." And I went to sleep. Then, it felt as if I had only laid my head on the pillow before I was awoken by something familiar in the air. Something that didn't belong here. It prickles the nape of my neck as dawn cracked the night sky. Coldness. I wake up, arms extended, reaching for Chloe at my side. But she isn't there. I call out her name, but there's no answer. There's nothing except for an agonizing scream in the distance. I almost didn't need to know where it was coming from as I got out of bed and started running towards the noise. Panting as I arrive outside of Pascal's cabin, where a woman was pulling on her clothes, wailing that Pascal had died. The woman kept screaming about how she had been sleeping next to a corpse the entire night. As I pushed past her crying, shivering body until I reached Pascal's room, and there I see him, with his eyes staring up at the ceiling. His skin still damp, and his clothes are drenched as if he'd been sweating. Except when I touch his face, it is ice cold. Immediately, my eyes dart around the room, but all I find is a puddle near the open window. The breeze coming in draws my cheek upward as I stare into the dense green undergrowth outside, searching for something that isn't there. For something I know I'll never see again. For something that owes me a favor. For something old. Something cold.